Welcome everybody. I'm David Leighton Brown, Master of Calumet College. I think we have reached 1:30 York University time, which means 1:35. And it is interesting when university people interact with especially military, but also government people. University people think meetings start 5 minutes after the hour. Military people think they start on the specified moment. There is a difference of culture in the world. Anyway, welcome to the Calumet culture. And one of the important parts of the Calumet culture is that we have taken very seriously the mandate given to all of the colleges to pay particular attention to facilitating and making more successful the transition to university of first-year students. And one of the ways to do that is the series in which our speaker today is about to speak. We have instituted a series of high-profile first-year transition speakers who really have something important to contribute to the ability of students to make that transition more effectively. I have heard our speaker today, Marc Wilchesky, talk on this subject in other forums, and that's what convinced me he had something important to say. This really is good stuff. Some of you are here because you know Marc, and so you know the quality of what he's about to say. Some of you are here because you came for lunch, and some of you are here because you trust that when we have a speaker at Calumet, he or she is really worth hearing. And we're about to prove that again today. I'm going to stop talking and let Marc speak. Marc, as you all know, is the Director of Counseling and Development here at York. He is going to be talking about resilience, and he is going to say really good stuff. Marc.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, okay, so the good news is that you had lunch. Even if I'm lousy, you got something out of today. And I thank David for the nice introduction. I actually usually ask people to introduce me to lower the bar instead of raise the bar, but we'll see what we can do. If you like this presentation, you have Jane Skinner at the back there to thank. Because how many years ago was it, Jane?
I was
5, 6?
Yeah, it might be that one.
I think so.
Yeah.
So Jane and Linda Tam, our friends in fine arts, asked me to came to my office one day and said, you know, we have fine arts mentors, and we really would like you to do something about resilience. And that was the start of this. And ever since then, I've embarked on a second career talking about resilience. So if you don't like it, I take full responsibility. If you do like it, you'll have to thank Jane for getting this to happen in the first place. So the first thing, thank you for coming. And how many of you are first-year students? Okay, that's what I thought. Well, thank you for coming, because it's aimed at first-year students. But looking around, I thought there may be a few other people here. So I hope this will be, actually, this is a topic that will apply, I think, whether you're a first-year student, second, third, or fourth graduate student, or anything else, actually, because resilience really is a topic. It's a hot topic these days. I don't know if you've been hearing about it elsewhere, but it really is a hot topic these days. Yeah. That's my granddaughter. And when I used to talk years ago, I used to show my kids. I always wanted to find a reason to show my kids, and tell them I showed them up on the screen. And now I'm showing my granddaughter, my first grandchild actually. And really, you might say, what the heck is he showing his granddaughter for? Well, because I'm proud of her. I mean, that's all. I just wanted you to see her. I really, really love her. Yeah, that's it. Now, what do you think about when you have kids or grandkids? You know, what do you hope for them? Do you hope? I'll talk about what I hope for. My first reaction is I hope they'll be happy and healthy. Those are the kinds of things. Happy and healthy, right? That's sort of what I hope. But in recent years, I've changed that. I still hope they'll be happy and healthy. We know, unfortunately, there are going to be some setbacks. Would you agree? How many of you have experienced a setback or know someone who's experienced a setback in their life, in home, work, relationship, health, something? How many? Raise your hands, please. Okay, so we don't need any more proof. We don't need hard data. We can just go here with this data that we can accept that, generally speaking, as much as we might like the road to be smooth, there are going to be bumps along the way. And what's important when there are bumps along the way is how do we bounce back from those bumps, right? How do we modify or moderate the adversity, the effects of that adversity? That's what this is about. It's not to say there won't be tough times. And it's not to say, by the way, that resilience means you just get over it. Because some things last a long, long time. Maybe forever. I don't know how many of you went to a presentation that was given, I forget now, maybe a couple of weeks ago. It was on grieving mothers. Did anybody see that? It was here at York. You heard about it? It was, oh, now I'm blanking on the name. Deborah Davidson, I think, from sociology, was talking about, it was she and another woman who had suffered losses of children. In one case, it was right at birth, where twins died. And in another case, it was the mother, the daughter was a 34-year-old daughter of one of the speakers who committed suicide at 34. And what struck me about their presentation is that they said that oftentimes people would say, well, you'll get over it in time. And in fact, they haven't gotten over it in time. They've learned to move on, but the hurt is still there. So what I'm talking about today is being able to bounce back, but not necessarily saying that it goes away, the difficulty goes away. It's how do we cope with that difficulty? So that's why my granddaughter's up here. Okay, no, really because I wanted you to see my granddaughter. Okay. So we're all going to face challenges. We all, I mean, whether it's a death of a loved one or it's a traumatic experience of some other sort, or it might be, if we're talking about students, it might just be a setback in a class where you get a poor grade. I mean, there's a whole range of things that can happen that are setbacks, from some relatively less traumatic to very traumatic, right? We all know of very traumatic incidents that happen, catastrophic events that happens. So what is resilience? I used to have a definition of it, which is it's a more physiological, physics kind of definition. Like when matter is bent out of shape, it bounces back. That's the technical term for resilience. But really what we're talking about is the ability to bounce back from adversity, from a setback. That's what we're really talking about when we're talking about resilience. Why is it so important? It's so important because we know we're going to be faced with setbacks, and we know also that people who are able to harness their inner resources, people who are able to have that resilience, tend to bounce back more quickly and tend to bounce back more fully. And that's what this is really all about. Again, I'm going to mention that what I'm talking about is something to moderate the effects of adversity, to moderate the effects of adversity. Some kinds of protective factors that will help us moderate how badly we react or how well we react in adverse situations. So just one quick example. I imagine if I went around the room, don't worry, I'm not going to, but because I know people get nervous about interaction. We don't want to really talk to each other. I'll talk about that in a minute. Social belongingness is a really important thing in resilience, but I'm not going to do any social stuff with you, so relax. Okay. But if I did go around the room and ask you about what things that you've read about or thought about in recent weeks, I expect we'd get a lot of different events that you can think of, major events, right? Am I right about that? Are things going through your head now? Anything going through your head other than Hurricane Sandy? What major event goes through your head when I talk about the need for resilience? Anything? Okay, I'm lying. I am going to ask you. What? Anything? Newtown. I mean, that to me, I was going to do that, and then I got overwhelmed when I was preparing this. I said, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to put Newtown up. But imagine that. And don't imagine it for too long. It's too upsetting. But how do people bounce back from that kind of awful, horrific tragedy in Newtown, Connecticut when those kids were killed? How do families and communities bounce back? And yet, what we know is the vast majority of them will. I'm not saying they're going to forget it or it's going to all go away, but they will move on with their lives. How do they do that? Hurricane Sandy is another example. I happen to know a number of people in Connecticut who were hit pretty hard by this, so I did this one. And this is just one photo after Hurricane Sandy, these two neighbors embracing after they're looking at the wreckage of their homes. So what's happening here is tragic, and yet what's also happening, I'm going to talk about in a minute, is they are leaning, literally and figuratively, leaning on each other. And I don't know these individuals, but that's a good thing, because one of the things we're going to talk about is in terms of resilience, the social connectedness that people have is one of the single most important predictors of how resilient they're going to be. What's nice about that is that we can work towards having more social connections. It's not you have it or you don't have it. We can work towards building social support networks. And that's what's good about that. So here we have just a quick glimpse of a tragedy, and two people experienced the aftermath the day after, probably. I don't know if it's the day after or a couple of days after. And the shock, the sadness, perhaps the anger, all those natural emotions. And then what we have is the next picture, which is what? It's recovery. It's the beginning of recovery. These are neighbors trying to put their street back in order, all the stuff on the street, trying to get things going. Some practical things have to be done for us to be resilient, to rebound. And that's exactly what's going on here. Despite this awful, awful hurricane, people started getting back to getting their lives in order, putting things back in order. And that's what resilience is all about. So maybe you're thinking, and if you're not, I'm going to ask you, is resilience ordinary or extraordinary? Meaning, is it only extraordinary people that can be resilient? Or is it ordinary people like us who can be resilient, who tend to be resilient? So many of you are nodding. It is ordinary people. It's not, I mean, you can think, again, I'm not going to, you already know that I lie, right? So I said, I'm not going to ask you, and then I do. So, I don't know, I'm not sure what I had before I got here, but it's a little weird. Okay, so you probably can think of extraordinary people in history, right, who are resilient, right? If I asked you, I'm not going to. This time I'm not going to. If I asked you, you have somebody in mind? Resilient people who've gone through tremendous hardship and yet somehow persevered and rebounded and went through it? Yes. But the reality is, although there are those people, most people are resilient. We have it within ourselves to be resilient. We don't have to be those extraordinary people. In fact, we know from research that resilience is not a single personality trait. It's not something you either have or don't have. It's something that you can build, that you can develop, that each of us can build and develop in ourselves. And that's what I really want to talk to you about today. I'm just going to read this one quote. Do you remember the Chilean mine disaster when the 33 miners were trapped, yes, underground? It was like 2010 in Chile. So this is a quote from one of the psychology, I'm a psychologist, so I found a psychologist, what can I say? One of the psychology types who was one of the first to get to the miners, and he writes, he said, "The presumption that men and women will usually break down emotionally if subjected to severe hardship is flawed. Most people have deep resilience and the ability to persevere in extreme situations. Those miners reached for the best in themselves." You know how that story ended, right? They were all, 33 miners, they were all rescued after, I forget how many months, 3 months or something like that. It was sooner than they expected. Is it 69 days? So it was, and it's, if you remember that story, it's remarkable how they persevered, and what did they do? What was one of the main things that kept them going? Group belongingness. They figured out how to lean on each other. And they had a whole system, if you've read anything about it, they had a whole system of who was doing what and who was responsible for what, and they had time when they had relaxing time, and in this little tiny quarters in a mine, okay? So again, are those miners extraordinary? In my view, yes. But they're not extraordinary in what we usually think of, right? These are just guys going into the mine every day. Ordinary people. And they were extraordinary in their resilience. So how can we develop resilience? It's possible that some people, I said before that it's not a single trait. It's possible that some of us may be more predisposed to being more resilient or not. But really what the research is telling us is that the bulk of resilience, the bulk of people who develop resilience actually do that. They develop it over time through a series of different kinds of factors that contribute to that resilience. And that's, I don't know about you, but that's pretty optimistic for me. Even if we don't think we're that resilient, we can become more resilient. So here are just a sampling of some of the factors that have been shown to be so crucial to resilience. The first one is, I've mentioned a couple of times now, having supportive relationships and a sense of social belonging. That seems to be one of the most significant factors that discriminates between people who are very resilient from people who are not as resilient. What that means is we have to be able as human beings to know how to ask for help from others when we need it. And what's nice about social connection and social belonging is that it's not one way. So when I talk about having a social support network, I'm not talking about one person always going to another and saying, I need help. That happens sometimes too. But that tends to be dependence from one person to another, yes? What I'm really talking about is interdependence. That is, we have a social support network wherein each member of that network both assists and is assisted by other members of that network. And when hard times fall on us, if we can rely on each other, that is what helps us get through those hard times. It's not rocket science that I'm saying now, but I'm mentioning it because the research shows us that in terms of resilience, social belonging, social connectedness, social relatedness is so important. Now, if this were a lot of students here, if there were a lot of students here, I'd be focusing a little bit more on university. I'm just going to mention one thing. What is the relevance for making or helping students be more resilient at school, at university? What does this mean for that? It means what York is trying to do and what David and Calumet College is trying to do, which is create a sense of belonging and create a sense of engagement with the university, with other students, with faculty, with staff, is critical to success at university. It's critical. Now, there'll be lots of people who get by without that, but I'm telling you, the students who are more at risk for failing or withdrawing or whatever you want to call it, the more they have this connection, the less the risk of that happening. We know this for a fact. This isn't make-believe. This is true. Okay? And the same thing applies out in the real world. You can think of your own situations, right? If you have a good close family, or you have, when I say family, I'm going to use it very broadly. That could be friends and family, right? You've established what you feel is a close family network. Well, these days, families means all kinds of things to all kinds of people. I'm not talking about the nuclear family necessarily, but I'm talking about a family of people I can rely on. If you have that, you are much greater probability of getting through and bouncing back when adversity hits. So I can't stress that enough. Social belonging, engagement, and social connectedness. The next thing I have here is a sense of positive self-esteem, self-confidence, and optimism about the future. Well, these are all easily said. It's not so easily accomplished, right? How do we get a sense of self-esteem, a positive sense of self-esteem? How does that happen? Anybody? Anybody want to answer? No? You just want me to work? Okay. So we get a sense of self-esteem. I'm not going to give you a developmental psychology class right now, but very quickly, we tend to develop our sense of self-esteem initially by relying on the positive feedback we get from significant others in our life. Right? Would you agree? We as very young kids, the more we get positive messages about what we do, who we are and what we do and how we're performing and all that stuff, we tend to feel good about ourselves. What's important is that as we grow older, we leave that model and we say, instead of relying on the positive regard or approval of others, we now have to rely on our own sense of what feels right to us, our own self-positive regard, and not worry about how others evaluate us as much. The irony is, in the beginning, it's the evaluations of others that can lead to positive or negative self-worth. The irony is, as we get older, if we rely on those very same evaluations, we're in trouble. Typically, we are in trouble, and that's often what it lands up where people come into psychologists' offices for help, because they're not feeling positive about themselves, and they're relying on the external evaluations of others. So the more we can move towards a positive sense of self-esteem, and the more we have a view of hope for the future, as opposed, the glass half full, half empty routine, the more we can look at the glass half full than half empty, the more resilient we are. And those things, self-esteem, self-confidence, and optimism or hope for the future, those things all fit together. And the more we have of it, together with the sense of social belonging and engagement with close family or friends, support network, again, the more likely we'll be resilient. A clear sense of personal values, purpose, and acknowledgement of personal responsibility for achieving positive outcome. I just want to say a couple of words about that. The more people are clear about who they are, what their values are, what's important to them, and the more they take responsibility for living a life that is consistent with those values, and they have a purpose in life consistent with those values, the more likely they will be resilient. What am I saying here? I'm saying this. Back to what I was saying about external evaluations. If people tend to blame external factors for what happens to them, and sometimes, look, Hurricane Sandy, I had nothing to do with Hurricane Sandy if I'm living in Connecticut, right? It happened, and I had nothing to do with Newtown. It happened. So it was an external thing that happened. But what I'm talking about is, in terms of recovery, if I keep saying it was this awful thing that happened and I'm powerless to do anything about it, the less chance we have to do a full rebound or recovery or to be resilient. The more we take personal responsibility for moving forward, for changing the situation, the adverse situation, for rebounding, personal responsibility for taking actions that will help us rebound, the more likely, again, we will be able to move on and get past the adversity, at least moderate the effect of the adversity. Any questions so far? Is this making sense? Okay. Now, you can take personal responsibility for something, but you also have to be able to know how to implement that. So that's what this next point is, the capacity to make realistic plans and to take steps to carry them out. It's important in terms of recovery, just as that picture indicated about the folks on the street. Somebody or some folks had to have some plan about how we're going to start cleaning this all up. Who's going to do what? Where are we going to dump the trash? Who's going to take care of toxic material? What gets thrown out? Who, et cetera, et cetera. And they have to have steps. They have to have some organization as to how they're going to go about doing it. So there has to be some concrete action and steps and planning to implement that personal responsibility that you take for change, for rebounding, for recovery. Effective communication and interpersonal skills, I think that goes without saying, right? If I had good and effective communication and interpersonal skills, you wouldn't all be bored now. Hopefully you're okay. So effective communication and interpersonal skills, we can develop those. That's the other thing about all these. We can develop these, right? But being able to communicate well and relate with people is essential, partly going back to what I said earlier about the interpersonal relationships and social support network. And the ability to manage emotions and effective problem-solving skills. Again, somehow we have to be able to figure out, initially, okay, lots of emotion, but we've got to be able to manage those emotions. Manage them in a way that we can then logically move to fixing or somehow rebounding, recovering from whatever it is that's hit us. So that's really important. And problem-solving skills, you know, there's a very quick model of problem-solving skills. Again, this can be taught. This can be taught to kids. This has been used with kids with learning disabilities, with all kinds of social difficulties. There's a very quick model of problem-solving. Maybe you all know it. I mean, the first thing is you have to identify a problem. And then you have to generate alternatives. So instead of saying, I have this problem, oh my God, what am I going to do? You start to say, what can I do about this? This is the problem. What options do I have here? A, B, C, D. And then what? What's that? Evaluate the options. I mean, in your head first, evaluate what makes the most sense. If I do this, will that, and then select, based on that evaluation, you select the best, what you think is the best option, and then you've got to evaluate again. Evaluate, were you right? Maybe it wasn't the best option, and if it wasn't, go back and problem solve. That's a very quick model. If we had an hour, we could be doing all kinds of exercise an hour for just problem solving. We could do that. Those are things that if you don't think you're a great problem solver, the first step is to at least know what the steps are, and then to start figuring out different kinds of alternatives that you can think of, different options that can be helpful. So all of those factors that I've just talked about, all of them can be developed, and building resilience doesn't happen overnight. It's been happening as we develop all along, but if you still feel that there's things you can be doing in any of those factors to help develop those factors, you will be adding what some people have called protective factors for risk, meaning you will have some, it's almost like immunization. You have some built-in immunization that can help you deal with hardship, okay? So, whenever I do this talk, I feel obliged to give some handy-dandy strategies. And for those of you who are wondering why you're here still, and you're not sure you came to the right place, at the very least, I'm going to make a sort of promise. If you get nothing else out of this session, there will be some laughter. There will be some laughter. I don't mean what you've had already. This is nothing, okay? This is really nothing. I didn't have to tell you that. You knew that. But there will be some laughter. Okay. So these are those factors I talked about we can build. But here are some strategies. I've sort of categorized them into two main categories. Stress prevention strategies and symptom reduction strategies. Because obviously, if you can reduce stress, if you can prevent stress from happening, right, you're going to be probably more resilient. It won't be as difficult. And if it does happen and you have ways to reduce the effects of stress, that can be helpful. Does that make sense? So I'm going to give you some handy-dandy tips, I hope. First of all, stress, we know. I'm not going to read this off, but stress is not a bad thing. Do we all know that? We all need some level of stress. If I didn't have any stress, I wouldn't prepare for this presentation. I wouldn't do my course thing and all that stuff. We need some level of stress or we're dead. We're not doing anything. So I'm not really even though people talk about stress management, and even I said stress prevention, it's not really stress I'm talking about. I'm really talking about distress, right? It's the kind of stress that leads to all these awful things that are up there, like mood problems and concentration problems and worry, and you get immobilized and you get somatic complaints and sweating and all that stuff. It's the distress that I'm talking about, okay? So just to be clear, I'm really not talking about stress prevention, I'm talking about distress prevention, okay? So here are some of the strategies. And whenever I do this with students, I get sort of their eyes glaze over about this point. When I say good nutrition, and they go, well, what do you mean good nutrition? What do you mean good nutrition? There's all kinds of research about this stuff, right? I'm not the best in terms of nutrition. I'm not bad. But the more we can really listen to some of these people, like these dietitians and nutritionists that talk to us about good, healthy eating, the better off we are going to be. There's no question about that. All this is research-based. Regular exercise, again, if you can do it, do it. How many of you take a walk at lunch? Okay, I'd encourage more of you to do that. If you have other ways to do exercise, do it. I know when I get home at night, I'm often too tired to go to the gym. I don't feel like going. I don't want to get up that early in the morning to go to the gym. So what do? I walk every day at lunch for a half hour. It's not the best, but it's something. Okay, and then I do a little harder stuff on the weekend. All right, but regular exercise has been shown to prevent stress. It prevents stress from happening. Enough sleep. That's when students really laugh at me. Okay, enough sleep. Right. But again, all these make sense, and okay, let's say, here's a disclaimer. I don't expect everybody to do all of these things, but if you can just change one or two of the things that you're doing now on some of these, it'll make a difference. Even if it's just one or two, I'm telling you. You can take that to the bank. Okay, why should you believe me? All right, relaxation and imaging, being able to relax and imagine. Do you have a happy place you go to in your mind? I do. How many of you have a happy place you go to in your mind? Sometimes. I'm not going to say it's a problem. Yes? And how many of you, those happy places, how many of them involve water? Yeah, almost everybody. Isn't this thing? How many of them involve ocean? Waves? Lakes? Yeah, okay. Typical, because water is kind of that many people have that. That's for me. I can picture a place that I love, and I hear the little waves, and I can see it, and I'm floating on the wave. Okay, never mind, you don't want to know all that. Okay, self-help groups, again, that's that social belonging, social support. Sometimes self-help groups can be really, really effective. Here's another thing for students. That's why I think study groups are so good. They're not technically a self-help group. We don't call them self-help groups, but study groups are in effect self-help groups, right? They're people with similar worries about a course helping each other in that course. The more we do that, the more stress we prevent, or the less stress occurs. Ventilate, that's not this ventilation. That means emotional ventilation, right? Just sometimes expressing and having a good scream or cry or whatever, that can be helpful for some. Prayer, for some, is really, really important. So spirituality, whatever that it means to individuals, all these things can help prevent stress. Change is as good as a rest. Change is as good as a vacation. Not all, okay, it's not always, but sometimes change is really good. Taking a vacation once in a while. I can't tell you how many people at York I speak to and I say, what are you doing for vacation? Vacation? Who can think of vacation? I do. I'm pretty busy. I can tell you I'm pretty busy here, but I do take all my vacation. I do take my vacation. And I'm going to self-disclose. I turn off the data on my BlackBerry. I do not look at my email. I don't even see if the email's coming in. You know when you turn off your data, you don't, that number at the top, I don't know if you have BlackBerry or iPhone, you know the number, it makes me very nervous during the day. Go, 52, 78, 150, 260 emails. I don't even see that because it gets stopped at where you stop it. Now, okay, it is a problem when you get back, but that's okay. It's still okay. It's still a break. It's still okay. Yeah, so you have 1,200 when you get back. It's all right. Time management. Again, we can learn to be better time managers, but time management is crucial. Just how to juggle different tasks, how we organize ourselves to do that. Social support, I've already mentioned. Interdependence, I've mentioned. Assertiveness skills. What I mean here is being able to say no sometimes. That you can't always take things on, and that just leads to more distress when you take too much on. So sometimes just being able to say, I'm sorry, I can't do that right now. I can do it in a week or two, but I can't do it right now. I can't respond. I love, no offense to the students here, but I love when students send me emails at 3 o'clock Sunday morning, a.m., 3 a.m. Sunday morning, and at 9 a.m. on Monday, I get another email saying, you haven't responded yet, sir. I'm sorry? I didn't know I was supposed to respond at 3 a.m. Sunday email. So that's assertiveness skills. Negotiation skills, again, being able to negotiate your way out of something or into something, that's really important. And problem solving directly rather than avoidance. I mentioned that earlier, the problem solving skills. That is, identify the problem, don't let it build up over time. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It snowballs. Bad analogy these days, but we're getting past the snowball effect. Okay. So those are some of the distress prevention strategies. Now I want to talk to you a little bit, sometimes even though you've used all these strategies, these prevention strategies, things happen, right? So I'm going to just give you a couple of what I'm called symptom reduction and adaptation strategies that can contribute to resilience. The first one is check your rating scale. Don't be a chronic 10er. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Say. Everything's a catastrophe. Everything's a 10. Like if you say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how terrible is this thing that happened to me? And everybody goes, it's awful, it's awful, it's awful. It's a 10. And that might be that I expected a phone call from my friend and she didn't call today. Well, if that's a 10, what is Hurricane Sandy? Or et cetera, right? So partly it's really what we think. I'm going to mention this now, even though I say it later on. What that's about in terms of rating scale, what we know, and this comes from the field of cognitive psychology, what we know is it's not the event itself, the terrible event, whatever that is. It's not the setback. It's not that event that determines how we feel about it. It's our reaction to it. In other words, what we think about the event leads to how we feel about the event. So the same event for different people, I'm sure you've seen this. So some people react it's catastrophic with a 10, and some people say, oh, that's no big deal. It's disappointing, but I'll get past it. Well, those different thoughts really determine how resilient we're going to be. It really does determine that. And cognitive therapy, Aaron Beck, who's the sort of the father of cognitive therapy, he would not like me saying this, but if I had to summarize it in one word or two, it's thoughts. It's all about thoughts and how thoughts influence our feelings and our behavior. Okay? So that's what this rating, I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Parking the problem. Now this is, I want to be clear, this is something that is not meant to say avoid it. Just avoid it. Like I said earlier, problem solving, deal with it directly. I'm not contradicting it may seem like I am, but I'm not. Sometimes, though, we have situations that come up where we have to just park it somewhere so we can get on with what we need to do for the day. Like if you didn't, you'd fall further behind in your work, let's say, or you'd mess up even more with your relationship or whatever it might be. So parking the problem is not avoiding it. It's just like when you park, if you drive and you park your car at a parking lot here, you know what's going to be there when you get at the end of the day. You're going back to it. And it's a plan you're going to go back to it and you're going to deal with it. But it is parked for temporarily. And that can help us, again, get through some very difficult times. I love this one, thought stopping. Never finish the worry, always interrupt it. So for those of us, when adverse situations happen, for those of us who tend to, how should I put it, perseverate on the problem. It's always there, being sort of obsessed about the problem. What's going to happen and how it's going to work and it's going to get worse. You keep worrying, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. This is a very simple technique, and it's basically a combination of saying stop to yourself, and having some relaxation technique. The simplest, and any of you have taken any courses or workshops on relaxation, you've probably heard this a million times. What's the simplest way to relax? The most effective? Breathing. We all do breathe. Did you know that? But we don't often breathe the right way. So if you haven't heard this before, I'm going to tell you, if you have, forgive me. But deep breathing comes from the abdomen. And what I'm talking about, if you take 4 or 5 deep breaths, sort of, when I say 4 or 5, a minute, right? So maybe 10, 12 seconds in and out, and you feel your abdomen, if you hold your hand here, you feel it come out. That's where the breath should be coming from. You breathe in, hold it for a few seconds, and slowly exhale. That should take 10 or 12 seconds, so that 4 or 5 times a minute you're breathing in and out. You do that for a few minutes, you will feel more relaxed. I guarantee you that. You cannot feel stressed and relaxed at the same time. They're incompatible responses physiologically. So at the very least, again, if you get nothing else from this, breathe. Breathe a few times a day. Breathe all day, actually, otherwise you might die. But deep breathe a few times a day to relax. So this technique combines, you have a worry that enters your head, you say to yourself, stop. I would recommend saying it to yourself as opposed to out loud, because sometimes people get worried about you if you speak out loud like that, unless you're in a room by yourself. So you say stop. So what happens now, again, some psychology, the stimulus is the negative thought. The worry. That's the stimulus for you to say stop, which means stop the thought. And then you engage in this deep breathing to relax. Instead of all the worry, you stop the worry, you do this slow breathing, deep breathing in and out, and then you replace that worry with positive self-talk. Instead of all the worry stuff, you now, whatever it is, you prepare in advance. I will get through this. I will be okay. I have friends that will help me, whatever it is. And that's what you do each time that worry comes. If you do that regularly, you will notice that the worry stops coming, certainly less frequently, and you're able to rebound from the worry much more quickly. Okay, so that's the thought-stopping idea. I just put here, another way to reduce symptoms is to go back to those prevention strategies. So, do whatever works for you. If you exercise or have a good meal, a nutritious meal, whatever it is, you can do all of that. Try to see another perspective. You've heard this before, challenge and opportunity instead of a crisis. Try and see the glass half full versus half empty. Again, that's thoughts about the event. Don't catastrophize the event. Think about how you can think more positively about that event. And this last one here is accept and adjust to things that you can't change. This is a big one, because there are some things in life, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, that we can't change, but we worry about it and obsess about it over and over again. Sometimes you just have to say, you know what, that's done. It's a new, no, I don't want to use, this is a cliche, it's a new normal, but it is. This is where we are now. This has happened. I've got to move on. I've got to accept this, and I can't change what I can't change. So just accepting that and adjusting to that, adjusting to the new reality is really an effective way to reduce the effects of adverse situations. So, having said all that, how many of you know the term gelotology? Aha! So gelotology, now you have it. Can you see it back there, I hope? Gelotology is the study of laughter, the effects of laughter physiologically and psychologically. Yes, it really is a word. So again, I am giving you some things you can walk out of here and say, you know, I learned something today. Gelotology. It's the study of laughter. Yeah, okay. But we do know that laughter can be the best medicine for difficult situations. We know that. We know that in there's all kinds of research now in terms of some of the serious illnesses like diabetes, cancer, all kinds of things that humor can be extremely helpful in terms of recovery and resilience. What that is it's a Rick Mercer. You know Rick Mercer? It's a Rick Mercer clip of snow in Toronto, and it really is hysterically funny. And the point of the video, which unfortunately you're not seeing right now, is how they completely catastrophize. You know, remember when Mel Lastman brought in the army and, you know, how could this happen to us? And, you know, my isotoner gloves and all this stuff, and my kids at Montessori school, it's really very funny. But the point of the video, other than doing what I thought I'd do, is give you a laugh, is how thoughts, how people react to snow, for instance, I mean, we had one just recently, can be so important in terms of how they bounce back from that, okay? So that's what that's about. So again, it's not the event that causes the emotional distress, it's our reaction to the event. So how many, hang on a second now. How many of you, when I say Muhammad Ali, what do you think? What do you think of? Boxer? Huh? Say again? Icon. What do you think about him? What do you remember about Muhammad Ali? Strong? Resilient? Did anybody think that he's world champion three times running? Boxing? World heavyweight? Okay. The interesting thing for me about Muhammad Ali, you know he has Parkinson's disease? So his quote is, inside of a ring or out, ain't nothing wrong with going down. It's staying down that's wrong. What's amazing to me about Ali is not the 3 heavyweight championships. It's what he's done since he's had Parkinson's disease. He's been unbelievable. Talk about resilient, especially for a guy, as you say, strong and, you know, heavyweight champion. Now he's got Parkinson's disease. But what has he done? He's gotten medals and he's worked for Parkinson's patients and research, and that's resilient. Another one, how many, when I say Christopher Reeve, what do you think of? The accident. But what do you think of before the accident? Superman. It's ironic, isn't it? Ali, Christopher Reeve playing Superman. Both of them, Reeve, you know, had an accident on a horse, was paralyzed, he was on a breathing apparatus, he eventually did pass away. But again, what's amazing about it for me, about Christopher Reeve, is not Superman and that he was a director and all this stuff. It's what he did after the accident. He fought for spinal cord research. He didn't give up. Now if you read about him, if you Google him, you'll see there's all kinds of information about Christopher. He had his moments when he was ready to commit suicide after that accident. But he bounced back somehow. Somehow he reached within himself and he bounced back. He had a tremendous network, his wife being one of them in particular, who was very, very amazingly supportive of him. Absolutely. So both these folks had network. They had a number of those factors that I've talked about. But that's what's important. Now the last one I want to leave you with is Viktor Frankl. I don't know how many of you know Viktor Frankl, but he's written, if you're interested, in a fabulous book about existentialism. And those of you who don't care about existentialism say, why would I want to read that? Man's Search for Meaning. It's just an amazing book that he wrote. And it's very readable. For those of you who don't know, Viktor Frankl was an Austrian Jew during the Second World War. He was an existential psychologist. And his family, entire family, brother, sister, parents, they were all taken to Nazi death camps, including him. And all of them perished except Viktor Frankl. And without giving you a lesson in existential psychology, the bottom line for him was freedom and responsibility for Viktor Frankl. That we have the freedom to make choices and we have the responsibility to act on our freedom. And despite that experience in the Nazi death camps, where he lost everybody and he went through hell, he comes out of there even more firm in his belief. And he says, nothing can be taken from a person but the one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. So we can't control everything that happens to us. What we can control, and in terms of resilience, this is what I want to leave you with, is our reaction to that event. We can control our attitude, our reaction, our thoughts and beliefs about the event such that we can rebound and moderate the effect of the adverse event. So with that, unless we get a link, I'm going to have to stop and see if there are any questions. But I will send the link to David and Susan, and make sure you have a look.
We will put it up on the County May website as soon as we get it, so please do.
Okay. So Linda, Jane has seen it. Are there any questions? Yes.
Could you elaborate or discuss what big 5 personality traits might be involved in resilience?
Oh, you know the big 5 personality traits. Where did you get that from?
Psychology, personality.
Yeah. Well, they talk about, but I can't remember now, honestly, the big 5, but yeah. Go ahead.
Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism.
Yeah. So what do you I think that, again, some of those, I think, the article I read about that had to do with the military, I think. I don't know if that's what you read. There's an article about on the military about how to help military deal with difficult events in the military. And they talk about the big 5 personality variables. The thing is, what I think about those variables is, that's what I was saying earlier, I think some of us may be more predisposed if you have more of those personality constructs in you. But I think they all interact with the factors I mentioned, the environmental factors, how they interact together to build resilience. Yeah. Yes, William.
Many of us, we teach these big classes, first-year classes. And what is perhaps the hardest thing I find is sometimes, well, it's more than sometimes, you have students who may be a bit unrealistic as to their dreams, their aspirations for their careers. And then as the instructor, you in some way end up puncturing those dreams. You don't want to, but at the same time, do you have any advice for how we can try to encourage those students to have the resilience to go and seek to do something else, or to redirect their dreams in a more realistic way?
Wow. Remind me next time not to ask if people have questions. They're too difficult. Remind me. Okay, I'm doing this again. Remind me. No questions. It's such a tough one. And I'll just share a personal experience with me where I used to do a lot of, I don't anymore, but I used to do, when I was first involved in psychology, I did a lot of psychological assessments, testing, and intelligence testing. And it was related to diagnosing learning disabilities or not. And so every once in a while I do one of these IQ tests, and the scores were so low, that, and these were students who were wanting to go on to university. And everything would suggest, based on those scores, that they were not going to be successful. Now, the reality was that some of them did go on to university, and they did get through on motivation, on perseverance, on persistence, and so on. So that I learned a long time ago not to place a ceiling based on that experience. Now, that's not what you're saying. You're saying, as I understand it, you have a student in your class and maybe they just don't pass or they do poorly. It's a fact. They've blown it. I guess the reason I'm relating the story to you, is that my approach in that case would be to say, look, you obviously, I don't know what words I'd use, but obviously this was not successful for you. This class was not successful. And it suggests that this line of inquiry or this field or this discipline, if you continue somehow, if you can, that is, there's different situations, may be very difficult. And you need to think about that, whether that's something you want to do or you want to consider, the hundreds of other possibilities out there for careers or study or whatever, however you want to put it. So that's one thing I'd be talking to somebody about, as opposed to saying you can't do it. Now, if it's a situation where, in fact, maybe it's a grad student and they've blown it, whatever, I guess the same thing would apply in the sense that I'd be saying, look, I know how this feels, and I'm sorry this has turned out this way,
But there are a lot of other things out there that you need to think about. And I'd be talking about resilience. I'd be talking about the kinds of support maybe that they have. Those would be the kinds of things I'd be saying. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's where I go. It's not easy, obviously. Yes?
You mentioned about your person can feel like they're overwhelmed with the emotion, but there's also the other extreme that one can say not really get much emotional at all, except maybe repress or suppress the emotion. You need to get to the solution.
Right.
And that, even though you solve the problem, have a degree of relief emotionally, that could probably affect your resilience. So what's the happy medium in using the emotion?
Yeah. Yeah, another good question. The emotion, I mean, you know, the connection between thinking, emotion, and behavior, you know, affect, cognition, and behavior, they're all interconnected, obviously, and you're right, there has to be some kind of balance there. So, first of all, I guess I should say there are times when people do need to seek help. I mean, I guess I'd be the first one to say that. There are times when it may be if you've blocked off your emotions, you're denying your emotions and nothing, maybe somebody should be going for professional help to get that worked through and somebody can help them with that. If you're not doing that, then I think, again, it's a discussion about, you know, I'm here to listen, I'm here to be there for you if you're one of those support people and say, it's okay to let yourself feel this. And sometimes it's a question of timing as well. It may not be ready at that point, it may be a week or a month later or 2 months later. So, yeah.
I think we may have a link.
We may have a link. Okay, let's see. If people have to go, I know it's 2 minutes to 1:30. Let's see. Where was that? Let's try. No. No. Try again? I don't think so. Go to the internet first. Yeah. No? Oh. That'll do it. Okay. And where, oh, yeah. Try again. Okay. Okay. Well, now that I've built it up, I hope you like it. It's one back, I think. It's up here. Just click on here. Yeah. Oh, we have to go to the slideshow. Current slide. Okay. Let's try. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, now I've told you the whole clip. Oh, maybe we still need the whole clip. Yeah, I know.
Every so often, the collective consciousness of our entire nation, from coast to coast to coast, is captured by a single solitary event. Unfortunately, it is often a terrible tragedy that brings us together. Last week in Canada, such a terrible tragedy occurred, a catastrophe that will affect the country for decades to come. There was snow on the streets of Toronto. Snow in Toronto. We're not making this up.
I remember it just like it was last week. I opened the door and looked out, and there it was. It was everywhere. I'm sorry. This is hard.
When I saw my Lexus in the driveway, it was covered. You could not see in, you could not see out. It finally hit home. Toronto had been a target. We had been hit by snow. But what about the residents? How did they cope? Many didn't, but many defeated the odds, and they rose to the occasion. I couldn't think of myself. There was no time. I thought of my child and how she needed to get to Montessori. And I reached out with my hand and my isotoner glove, and I pushed the snow off the windshield. And I just got in the car. After that, I blacked out. For many, it was just too much.
I always thought that this was the type of thing that happened to other people. But when I saw the snow, I started screaming, "Where's the army? Where's the police? Why me? Why now? Why Toronto?"
And when it was over, the horrifying numbers came in. 20 centimeters of snow on the streets of Toronto.
Snow in Toronto. A CBC National special report.
Okay, so my promise comes through, I hope. So thank you very much for coming. I hope this will help with your journey to resilience. Thanks very much.
Okay, just as people are leaving, one question. How many of you have ever seen a James Bond movie? Okay, how many people have read a James Bond book written by Ian Fleming? Okay. One of the books, and I cannot remember now, really speaks to the point you were making about stress and distress. The book begins with James Bond being undercover. He's pretending to be a stockbroker in London. And he is playing a game of golf with a person who turns out to be the villain in the novel, Goldfinger or somebody. And they're playing golf and they're betting on the game. And we get to a particular hole where the villain is helping James Bond to look for his ball in the rough, and the villain steps on James Bond's ball and presses it down into the ground, and then says, "Here, I think I found your ball." And then Ian Fleming says, and the villain also says, "Let's make this interesting. If you can, par this hole, we'll double the bet. Raise the stakes." So Ian Fleming says, if James Bond had been the innocent stockbroker that he was pretending to be, the stress would have been too much for him in this situation. But he was not a stockbroker. He was James Bond superstar. He rises to the occasion and he needs this stress. He swings the club, he does Tiger Woods, he puts it on the green, he wins the bet. Well, stress affects different people in different kinds of ways, and we are not all James Bond. We are not all Marc Wilchesky either, but thank you very much. I want to give you, before I leave the microphone, a memento of this occasion. We have here a Calumet College bag full of Calumet College stuff, which you can enjoy with our thanks.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.